Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into Cloud Native FM podcast. This is your host, Simon Sufder, host of this show that's named Cloud Native Podcast. And what we are covering today, let me give you some glimpses of what we are covering today. We all know we have reached a point where adoption of Kubernetes and the understanding of Kubernetes tools are mature enough to start hiding them away from the teams consuming them. And nearly all platform teams, 94%, according to the recent study, and application developers, 89%, believe it would be valuable to have a self-service workflow or portal where developer can provision environments themselves. This podcast explores some of the approaches different development tools take to provide a better and simplified experience for developers while allowing platform teams to curate the resources these tools use and how do they behave. And without any further delay, let me go straight to my guest today is Romaric from Qovery. He's a co-founder of the Qovery tool. He's been getting famous every day. But thank you very much, Romaric. Can you introduce yourself a bit to our audience, and then we start the session today?
Yeah, thank you, Saim. Thanks for having me today. It's great, and even if it's Saturday, it's still like a pleasure just talking about all of that. And thanks for introducing the subject. Yes, I'm Romaric, CEO and co-founder of Qovery. I'm a tech guy, still like a tech guy, even if I'm not used to. I'm not supposed to work on technical subject like every single day now, since I'm running the business. But still happy, like just talking about all of that. Yeah, I started my career as like an engineer, mostly like working on infrastructure side of the things, like more than 10 years ago, where I met my co-founder Pierre, actually. So in the financial industry, we were managing thousands of servers, and just fast forward, I've took some position as a backend engineer, so DevOps, all those things. So at the end of the day, you can see that all those positions are converging into like some other positions. So, and today I'm a CEO and a co-founder of Qovery. So we just started this company 3 years ago, basically. And the idea is how we can make sure that anyone's, like any developers, can be a bit more autonomous in their day-to-day work. How do they can just like deploy the application, because you know that they are building great software and they need to just focus on what they are building, and then like trying to find a way just to make sure that they can deploy their application. It's exactly the purpose of Qovery. So I think the subject is spot on concerning like platform engineering, how we can make sure that those developers are a bit more autonomous, but at the same time, how we make sure that people that are in charge of the infrastructure keep the control and the governance of all the things, because it's not an easy subject, obviously. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome, awesome, absolutely. And I think it's better now you actually jump into the ladder from development to the DevOps, and now it's being the role of managing your own startup to helping all of the consumers and the developers to help them make sure they deploy efficiently and more fastly. So it's been a great. I'm speaking to you today, but let us know. Like we've been in the Kubernetes space for a very long time. We see the transition from the Kubernetes container to the orchestration engine, and now it's getting more and more mature enough. And enterprising is actually racing into this Kubernetes ecosystem and a Kubernetes economy of the IT, you can call it. So let me start the first question to get your opinion. Do you think there's a necessity of a time that hiding Kubernetes from developer is clearly where the industry is going, and we can see platform engineering is getting more and more noise in the community. And what you take on, like, do we need to hide Kubernetes from developer? If that's the case, then how?
I think it's a very good question, actually. And it's true that Kubernetes is everywhere, but Kubernetes is not the only pieces that is necessary to just be proficient out to deploy an application as a developer. And that's the main issue, actually. You can obviously be proficient in Kubernetes, know how to use kubectl, know about like the different concepts that you have behind ingress controller and deployments and all of that. but it doesn't prevent you like to learn about all the different pieces, network, how it works, the cloud provider also, what are like the resources that are required just to expose your applications, container registry, and it's all the different elements that you have around Kubernetes that makes like Kubernetes even like more complex in some way. And those developers, they need to focus also like on their application, they need to respond to the business needs to build like those great applications. It's a job by itself. So if you ask them just to be also proficient into all the different elements, so network, systems, Kubernetes, the cloud provider itself, the databases, and to provision that, but also be proficient and just shipping what they are supposed to ship. It's a lot of work for just one like a person. So that's the purpose, actually. Hiding the complexity of Kubernetes is in some way necessary just to be to avoid to have like this cognitive load of how the things work behind. But obviously, as an engineer, I'm a tech guy. I like to learn, and I'm pretty sure, and we are seeing that from our customers. We have like a lot of even developers, backend mostly developers, even sometimes front-end developers that are aware of how things work behind, but still they don't have time just to dig into all the details. And this is not what the companies ask for those people. They ask them to ship applications that is serving the business purpose and not the infrastructure side of the thing. So yes, it's necessary in some way, but it's not something that is, if you can learn about Kubernetes and all those things, that's great, but it should be like a bit hidden, like for, I would say 90% of the developers. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think like if you talk to any developer right now, and I think if you look at the tools today that provide developer, let's say we talk about like if you want to code in Java or IDE, Node.js, VS Code, you might end up like now the developer what has to face like he has to know how to run the application, then he needs to install Kubernetes cluster, and then he needs to understand how to use kubectl to deploy their local environment, and learn how to use tools like Docker for containers and
Yeah.
kubectl to interact with Kubernetes. And in that case, you immediately align with how to deploy workload in all major cloud providers. And that's where is a struggle, because if you go into
Yeah.
the cloud, you need to understand the concepts of the cloud as well. Like if you want, might be you're using EKS,
Yeah.
GKE, or AKS to deploy your
Yeah.
application. And EKS there has their own permission model. Google
Yes.
has their own permission model, and Azure has their own permission model. And that's where the natural question came into the people mind: how the platform and the platform team can assist developer in being more efficient by providing automating tasks. And
Yeah.
on term of the same question, like how to find what to automate, because sometimes it's difficult to and you can actually automate everything, but there's a sometime there's a necessity of
Yeah.
some things to have to be automated. But now it's up to you how you actually take
Yeah.
take this domain going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I can respond on our side. So at Qovery, how we have built this platform for a certain type of business, and I will explain what's the type of businesses that we are covering, because we don't have the pretensions to cover like all the needs of the industry, different industry. That just before responding to that point, let me just come back to one point that you mentioned. It's not only if we look at our customers, what we have discovered, because since we are kind of power users, so you see that we are quite bleeding edge. So the people that are working at Qovery, they are quite experienced. They are mostly all senior SREs. They know how to develop, and they have the ability to jump into backend stuff, into infrastructure elements. And for us, for instance, creating our own Docker file for our applications is something that is just obvious. We have learned from that for a long time, and it's very simple for us. But if you look at the majority of the developers today, and we are seeing that with our customers, most of them, they are not even familiar with Docker itself. Docker, we are talking about a technology that is used now for more than 10 years. And those developers, they are not familiar how to write a Docker file. It happens every single day. So we had to create contents to educate them about just this first step, because We are talking about Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is scaling up containers, is deploying container. But if you are not able just to create those containers, then it doesn't work out. So you see, just even the first steps, they are not even covered by most of the developers. And that's the reality of the industry. So that's something that you have to keep in mind, especially when you are thinking about this platform engineering methodology, that is like how you streamline the experience for those developers that are not the least experienced, just to be a bit more autonomous. Because yes, they have technologies like to deploy, but today, is it when we are talking about all of that, we are obviously talking about containers and not virtual machines. So it's one thing. So who is creating like those container images first also? Is it like the developer itself or not? And all of that must be considered, and it's part of the experience. You see. So to respond to your questions, like what's the challenge? How do you just fix that challenge of being versatile enough, but not too much? Otherwise, if you are too much opinionated, then you can miss like some stuff. It's a hard and difficult problem, to be honest. And this is where you really need to provide like the right tools to the right people, just like looking around what are like the different services that they're using, how do they develop. And this is where I associate a lot the platform engineering movement as building an internal product. It's like building a product for the developers themselves, and just to serve like a specific purpose. So you really need to tailor the experience to what they do need internally, and not to be too much versatile. Otherwise, you have to be like tons of different pieces that are not even probably like necessary. So it's a difficult issue. I can just explain. So at Qovery, how what we have built. So the platforms that we have built is a product that runs first on the cloud account of our customers, like bring this experience for the developers to deploy their applications. But we are not talking about all the type of applications, like it's really web applications. So mostly that must be containerized. That could be microservices coming from monorepositories. So we expect that our users are first using Git, for instance. So it could be that those applications can come from GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. They can even provide like their own container registry. So you see, we have a set of prerequisites that we expect from them. And then from that, they can start and they can deploy their application. And we provide a path that is opinionated in a way that makes sure that they get the experience that they do expect, since it's very familiar to what they probably already know as individual developers, like the Vercel experience or the HeroQ experience. And this is something that is like quite useful for those kind of developers. So is that responding to your question, Saim?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That is essential. Absolutely. That's Yes, absolutely, Romaric. That's absolutely. You nailed it wonderfully well of all the different things in a very small but very efficient word to explain how the pain of the developer is actually facing. I think like currently, if we go back in time and you have been a developer in the past, I spent my life in the development in the past as well. So if you look at the virtualization wave when it came up, everybody talking about what is happening at the end, and we understand, and we all know what happened at the end. Virtualization started, people start building their own solution to become a virtual, they have their own data centers, and they start virtualizing their own data centers to deploy different application on that virtual machine. But what end up happening here is what the end result of the virtualization wave was, like everybody is now using VMs in the cloud. I never see a person when I'm developing my application is like I can create hardware myself, and then I can virtualize it. Then I install a Linux operating system on top of it, and then I install binaries, and then install third-party apps, and then eventually I start up deploying my apps on top of it. That's now if we keep on everybody is doing this mean you are not actually investing the time in for your business, because you have your job as a developer is to uh, evangelize your business need, what your customers need. So currently in the Kubernetes or the platform engineering wave is now eventually going up. Like if you install Kubernetes or anything, now you essentially need, like developers need to deploy, is to use their application outside of the cluster, and then they installing ingress controller, then they need service meshes, then they install a Istio and Linkerd, and then they need GitOps, then they install Flux and Argo CD. And then if they want to understand like how my application behave in the production cluster, they install using Grafana and Prometheus. So how much of that developer, how much of the boilerplate is needed for just your application to work on? It's where that's where the IDPs model or the services model that's come
Yeah.
very shiny into it. And now because you spend time mostly with the customer to deploy their application in the cloud on AWS or the different cloud servers. I see one of the reports from the Qovery, and I think you have beat the numbers of how many applications you currently deployed. I lost the track of how much of the application. Can you let the audience or the developers who are listening to us, how they are actually, what is the problem you actually see is very essential and it becomes a bottleneck for another developer? Like remember, it's not just a one developer is deploying application on the team. You have 3, 4, 5, sometimes hundreds of developers accessing the same cluster, and sometimes you give them RBAC permissions, role-based access control. And sometimes some development teams, team A and team B, using the same cluster to deploy their apps on top of it. And sometimes they need Argo CD and a team B need Flux CD. And then they start using namespaces as a service approach to deploy their application. But that's become a bottleneck because now you actually carving your clusters, and it has become CPU memory, and you are actually getting onto the shoulder of developers to think. Like in Qovery, when you're developers and when you're actually solving the problem of developer and enterprises, what is actually how you actually solving the problem, number one, and number
Yeah.
two, what is the most frequent problem you see on daily basis while working with the small enterprises and plus development teams?
Yeah, very good question. And just like to respond to that point, because you mentioned that there is a myriad of services that you have to choose just to make sure that you run your application. You're completely right. You have to think about the internet connection between the services, the TLS, the way that you are going to pull the code, the source code from your repository to build it and then to deploy it, deploy the final container images into your cluster. All of that is like just a pain just to manage. It's the job in some way of the platform engineering team just to provide like the right tools to the developer. The developer on the platform engineering experience must not think about all those things, really focusing on the developer. So the experience is what we call the golden path, must be provided by the platform engineering teams to the developers. So for that, they need to know exactly what they do expect and how do they work. But not only, they also need to provide and educate the developers in a new way, maybe, or just like, I don't like to say in a new way because I don't like to tell to people to change the way that they do work. Is really by being integrated, but sometimes you have to because you can see that there is some bad habit, but it's just providing an experience to the developers to do what they have to do. So, okay, if you step back as a developer, you have your developer, you have your IDE, you are working on Git, you are pushing changes, you are creating branches. Then those branches must be reviewed by your team members. Then when they're merged back because it's validated, then you want maybe deploying that application into a certain environment, or maybe you want to deploy it in production. And this is the way only, just the way that the developer is thinking about his code. That's it. He's not even thinking about Argo CD, should I use, I create an ingress controller, oh, I need to have like this application that is talking to the other one. Obviously, he must have the perceptions and know about like his application, how would this application behave, but about the technical details itself, it should not be the case. So this is where you really need to provide like the experience that you do expect and take care of, as a platform engineer, take care of all the underlying elements. And that's the way actually our customers work also, like again, with Qovery and with other like platforms, because we have some customers that were already building, they had like their own platform internally, but it takes a lot of time just to create their own IDP. So that's why they do want to use Qovery, because they have like a set of elements that are already in place and they can build on top of that. But basically, it's really the job of the platform engineering team. So they can provide the experience that they do expect, but they must be okay that the experience of the developer must be the ones that they are already using, and changing the way that developers work should not be like an option. Actually, it should be like really tailored to the experience that they already have. So again, it's a big challenge, but it really helps, like in terms of velocity. That's something that we're seeing every single time where you add like a new concept for the developers. You ask them to learn something like typing commands, kubectl commands, or doing I don't know, special extra step to deploy the application. It's really hard to scale inside like an organization, because those steps can be learned by some people, but not from the other ones. And then they can just miss some steps because they are manual actions like to deploy the application. So the more you streamline the experience, the more you automate the complete workflow, and the better it is just to scale the organization and get those high velocity deployment and all of that. And just to respond to your question, yes, we reach the point where we have like more than 100,000 deployments per month by our users. It's growing like super fast. And because of that experience, and what we're seeing is that a customer, so that they are starting using our platform, they start with like just a few deployments per week. So obviously, because they are used to deploy just a low certain amount of times into their platform. But with Qovery, what they see is that they can just deploy faster and faster and faster, and get this velocity that they do expect, because every single time that they push their code, basically they can deploy like a full environment at the set of their application, because they get the experience that they do expect. Yeah. So it's all about the experience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You nailed it once again perfectly well. But I think currently, like there's a two approaches. Like if you look at the startups and their teams, there's a one movement called the DevOps movement, and it's all nailed about the cultural changes. And somebody say like DevOps is great, but when you are required to have a cultural changes, that is not easy. You have, because your team is already built up for the 10 5 year experience of how you actually restructure your team. But DevOps required a cultural change within the organization. That's become a bottleneck to go faster. Another platform engineering wave coming up, and the DevOps is more about is fine tuning the dev and ops operation. And platform engineering, people like to call it, is actually accessing or becoming more easier for day two problem of development and the operation team. Like what do you think, like how you define, number one, a platform engineering discipline, or how you look at this domain of new platform engineering? That's very important. And because the next question is eventually is more oriented around how you actually measure your platform, and now you actually have a part of team where you actually helping your customers, and your team is actually solving other people's problem, and how you actually measure your problem. But first I try to get your opinion, like how you look at the platform, and how you look at the initial transition like DevOps and the platform engineering. What the transition is look like? Do you think that people still using DevOps and platform engineering side by side, or just like platform engineering eventually reduces and actually reduces some of the gaps that DevOps has?
Actually, they are not mutually exclusive. They are like complementary. DevOps and platform engineering must work like as a one single piece. It's for me, the platform engineering movement is the evolution of the DevOps engineering methodology in some way, because what we have seen from, even if we are talking about DevOps methodology for more than 10 years, actually the number of companies that are really like applying this methodology is probably not so high as what we do expect. Okay, and we still have this issue of you have developers that needs and rely a bit too much on the DevOps, so engineering team, just to deploy and ship their application. It's a big issue because that's not exactly what we did expect with the DevOps engineering methodology. So this methodology for me, I would call it, and maybe some people will not be like okay with that definition, but for me, platform engineering is just like the evolutions of really the DevOps engineering methodology in some way, is like completing the goal of the DevOps engineering methodology. That is, how do you make sure that those developers, they're like a bit more autonomous? How do you make sure that you provide the right experience to the developers to ship and be able to do what you call day two operations? Exactly. So that's pretty important. And for that, to solve that, is we have to move from the case, because I've seen that on too many like organizations, and still again today, where you have a DevOps engineering team that is solicited by engineer, so the engineering department, and the engineers, they ask for, hey guys, can you give us access to that, to X, Y, Z? You know, this famous, actually, it's not even DevOps, it's like IT way of working, but that's what happens even today, because actually really moving into something that is self-service, like it's the self-service mindset. So part of the platform engineering movement is a really drastic like change that you need to get from that organization. It requires you just not to think about, yes, we can provision, we can give you that, access to that, and you just have to ask, and then it's just a kind of a ticket system, to something where you have really to think and take some time to really understand how the developers, engineers inside your organizations, they are working, what are like the set of tools, and you need to get deeper into all those elements. Then from that, you really need to have like this product approach, so which is analyzing the way that they work, providing some options, and then iterating with those people. So starting to provide a platform, so an interface that they can use just to self-serve in some way the resources that they need, like to do what they are supposed to do. But for that, you need still to keep the control, the governance, and all of those elements. And this is where you need to really change like the mindset of the full organization, and also on the IT side, but on the engineering side. And that's something that's what makes the beauty of the platform engineering movement, is really like this. Removing those silos of like engineering and IT people, because even, and it really depends of the organization. And if you ask like to 10 the different organizations, what's the DevOps engineering methodology, even today in 2023, you will have like not the same explanation. And it could be exactly the same for the platform engineering movement. Still, it's an emerging movement. But what I think people are okay to say is that engineers must be like a bit more autonomous to just do their job, because today they are relying too much on DevOps engineering infrastructure. You can call it, name it as you want, but people that are managing the infrastructure, and it's an issue. And we have those companies, even big organizations, so I can't give the name of those organizations, banking organizations, US ones that are coming, so platform engineers, they come to us and say, hey guys, we can't serve the purpose, we can't serve all the demand and the requests from the engineering department. We are looking to shift left infrastructure management. And that's exactly what happens with like the platform engineering movement, is not giving all the full power to engineers to do what they have to do. Obviously, you need still to keep the control. The security is really an important aspect. You need just to, you can have like the right tools around that, but making sure that they can be just a little bit more autonomous, just to, from the code, the application code, to the production, or at least from a development environment that is very similar to what they do expect in the production case, then they can just test their application the right way, is something that makes like platform engineering quite interesting. And I would also add just something quickly, is that in the platform engineering movement, so it's also my definition, but what we're seeing is that you have even more, you have some new parties that are part of, new people that are part of the equations, like a product manager, for instance, that they are working closely with the developers. Now they are part of the process. That's something that we are seeing. So since they are able, so the developers are more autonomous to do what they are supposed to do. Also, product managers, they can be much more involved into the development process and test like the new stuff in a much more like a flexible way. So this is the beauty also of platform engineering. If we shift left infrastructure management to engineering team, then you will be closer to the business side of the things. And this is where you will see new people coming into the equations, and you can be a bit more like able to test and try out new stuff. And we'll see new standard emerging probably in the coming years. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you described platform engineering is wonderfully well. Like, yeah, I think that one of the best definitions you can think about is like the shift left, like giving your developer more autonomy. Meaning, like I think today's developer, what they actually do is if they need a cluster to access it, they ask DevOps or SRE team to give me access to, let's say, this namespace, and then the access is granted, and then they deployed some, let's say, Istio, or let's say any application or any third party tooling. Then they're required to file a ticket as well, so they can install their apps on top of it. That's good approach. Like I think that's approach is kindly created to have not a very convoluted environment, to have a very consistent environment everywhere. With the DevOps revolution, your
Yeah.
production system is closer to the development system, or your development system is much closer to the production system. So you can actually drill down to understand, see the deeper dive, like how the events happening and how your application behave in the production environment. I think with the platform engineering approach, and specifically if you look at the Kubernetes, now developer is not just writing sirf app configs. They're also writing an infrastructure configuration in Docker
Yeah.
file and Kubernetes YAML file. This mean now they understand infrastructure really good compared to the past, and now they're
Yeah.
brave enough to actually consuming and working with infrastructure to any every day to day. So this mean we can actually trust these developers. We can trust these developers so they can actually create infrastructure for themselves. Many we can create services. Like if developers need to build a CI/CD pipeline, they can just call a service, and then their application is actually going through for the various different phases. And also
Yeah.
if they actually deploy some application, they can actually call a service to deploy it. So this meaning they have more control. And for all these waves, eventually what they're actually doing is giving developer to more focus on the business need, rather than how to troubleshoot Grafana, Prometheus, Istio, Linkerd. That could be a great. You are a wonderful engineer, we know, but your job is actually to solve your business problem, because in Kubernetes, the learning curve for everything, and in the platform engineering in general, is the learning curve is a very, very vast, is a steep learning curve to go to this process. But now we have, I think, recently CNCF announced a platform white paper, and this mean more and more community are chiming into the platform engineering. In near future, in KubeCon, and Amsterdam, KubeCon, Chicago, BackstageCon is happening. This means the revolution is always around self-service, and to understand the self-service capabilities. And now you become a part of the CEO of the company that eventually gives service to your production, to your end user. And what do you key takeaway, because that's very important to understand at this moment of time, like how do you measure your team success? And if you are actually build a platform, what criteria to measure it? And plus the teams who are operating these platform, how you measure
Yeah.
their success as well. So can
Yeah.
you shed some light?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I can even show you with my screen so how it works and how it can be just
Yes,
shown. But just basically,
absolutely.
yeah, I will share just my screen after. But something that you mentioned, so about so how do you measure like the success, and how do you measure that the adoptions of platform engineering adoption is like in good shape. So the user experience for me is one of the main like a key element. User experience, so is the adoption actually, like a user adoption of the platform. So okay, it's really important. So in your organization, if you want to and you want to be like your platform engineering team, maybe you already have one. I think the main goal of that platform engineering team is really just making sure that anyone's like can just get what they do expect, and it's by the user adoption. So how many developers are there using for real the platform itself to serve their purpose? Okay. And for that, there is like so many ways. So there is so many things that you have to do just to achieve like this adoption. So the first is obviously give them like a clear path of so what we could call golden path, just to deploy the application. Okay, they have nothing, they have a project and they want to deploy. And how do you provide this experience just to make sure that they're able to do it again on their own? So that's the first thing. The second thing is to provide that. So that's what we've discovered even with Qovery. So to provide that experience, it's not as simple as just like connecting your repository and then deploying your application and it's done. It's really like the debugging, and you mentioned you name it, with like all the different tools that you can have around just to troubleshoot your applications. But it's really like the debugging experience that you do provide to the end user, to the developers. How do you make sure that the logs that you do provide, because obviously when you're making a demo to your team and you perfectly well the platforms, then it will work. But when you have someone that is autonomous, don't know about the infrastructure, don't know about the platform, don't know about like anything, like even Docker, but has like some basics, and he wants to deploy his applications like autonomously, how do you make sure that when it's failing, because it will fail for sure, how do you make sure that you report back the right information at the right time to this user, to educate it in terms and to help him just to succeed into what he's looking for? And this is something that is super difficult, super hard just to provide. And that's one main key element of what we did focus for a long time on at Qovery. So just going back to the elements, how do you measure that? So for me, there is obviously the user adoption, so it passed by the user experience. You have what we call the DORA metrics, so the number of times that the people will deploy their applications, so the number of time that the time that it takes just to recover, so the time to recover, the time that it takes just to get back to something that we're working when you do something and you do deploy something that is wrong. You have like those elements. That's a good way to just measure. But as a platform engineering team, what you do want is really like this adoption, because if you don't have the adoption from your engineering team, then it's a fail. It's just a fail. So yeah, there's so many things that we can just break down to get into that success. Yeah.
Yes, Romaric. Are you?
Yeah.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Good,
And
good, good.
yeah, is that responding to your question, or did you want me to get into like much more details? Yeah.
No, no. I believe you have explained it wonderfully well. You talk about Torah metrics to measure the team, how frequently you can deploy your application to the production. This can be your metrics.
Yeah.
How user friendly is your platform is, that can be a measurement metrics for your platform, and how eventually how much is actually easier for your developer to consume the services that you added in the platform. That can be a measure, but it's a research domain. They will never come to be in this point of today to tell everyone like this is a standard metrics that every platform should have. This is a study that's happening everywhere in the world, and the CNCF platform white paper is eventually need those kind of addition, like how you can actually measure the metrics of the platform team and the platform is actually working on. So I definitely want you to take a look at it and know your thoughts on that paper as well. But basically, it's actually, it is a search-oriented category. But I think you've done is you explain it wonderfully well. So before I let you go, the final question before we wrap up: why do you think right now is currently? Why do you think is organization should build a platform whether it's just for the Kubernetes or for other services is, and how this team responsibility can contribute to the business success.
Yeah, it's a very good question, but I think that everyone that are like interested in platform engineering movement, they know about the response. It's just like all about velocity and productivity. You make your developers like closer to the infrastructure. They are much more autonomous. You can obviously so. And I think we can go back just at the beginning. If we had the chance, and if companies had the chance to hire tons of people managing the infrastructure for nothing, like IT, you can call it DevOps or whatever, then we'll not have like the issue of, and we'll even not like you're talking about platform engineering movement, because it would not be like a problem. And it's because companies, they struggle to hire people's managing infrastructure. It's really complicated. We are seeing those companies that they have one DevOps, two, three DevOps, like one DevOps for, it's the mean that we are seeing is one DevOps for 30 to 40 engineers. So from our customers, it's nothing. You imagine you have like one DevOps engineer that is taking care of 40 engineers. So they are all asking and requesting stuff. Just obviously they have a complete CI/CD pipeline. But again, if the developer needs to spin up a new environment, they need to deploy a new project, they need to ask this DevOps engineering team, this solo DevOps that is like in charge of just serving their purpose. It's not even possible. So that's why like every single organizations that they are like scaling their business, they're scaling their engineering team, they must consider like building their platform engineering team, because otherwise they will just struggle to serve the demand and respond to the business needs, because they need to ship fast, create new project or iterate, create new versions, but they rely on like just a few elements inside the organization to create the underlying infrastructure. So those people, instead of being in a reactive mode, so the DevOps guys can be like really in a platform engineering mode, so in much more, they can anticipate the needs and build the platforms that makes like those developers self-serving themselves and to ship their application instead of asking for something, opening up a ticket and waiting that the DevOps team, so IT department, you can call it as you want, but that's the reality of the thing. So you have those DevOps that they are like also doing some IT work sometimes, and just to serve the purpose. So it's much more reactive. It's less efficient than just being able to do it on your own. So yeah, that's the reason why like all organizations that are scaling up and trying to scale up their business, and they are like they are growing their engineering team, must consider definitely building a platform engineering team. Yeah.
Awesome, wonderful insight once again, Romaric. And before I let you go, can you explain a work the Qovery team does to the people who didn't already know in a few words, in a few sentences? If people like to try to uh, sign up for your platform or want to see the action, can you give some people some resources to look into it, or some of the learning resources you can provide for the people who are listening to us? So over to you now again.
Yeah, it's a self-service product, so you can go to www.qovery.com website. Basically, what we do is that we provide self-service infrastructure platforms that you can use to build on top of it and provide like the experience that your developers expect to deploy their application in a much more like efficient way and autonomous way. That's basically what we do provide, and we integrate. So it's a product that runs on top of your cloud providers. It's on top also of Kubernetes under the hood. And we manage from the day one to the day two operations, like on the Kubernetes part and all the different elements. And then you can just really focus on the experience that you want and you expect for your developer. So basically, they can, in just a few minutes, get access to a full platform that is tailored for their needs. And you can just watch the videos online or try out the product by yourself. And you will see that we have really focused on the experience for the developers. And obviously, when you are coming from the infrastructure side of the things, you can keep the control, you have access to governance, the security is one, they are like a really major aspect of the platform. And you can even provide your own Terraform file. So if you want to give access to some modules, because that's something that we didn't discuss, but the self-service thing is also because you can provide like a kind of catalog services. So you can provide the own components that you have already built. And that's something that you can do also with Qovery. You can provide, give access to your Terraform modules, your Helm chart, and all of that to your development team, so they can reuse it the way that you want, because it's your own modules that you have created for that purpose. So yes, thanks, Saim, for the opportunity. And yeah.
Thanks, Romaric. But thank you very much. And all the resources are available in the YouTube description. Go and click those, and if you will find wonderful blog posts that mention in the Qovery website how they're eventually solving some of the self-service problem for a lot of the bigger companies in today's world. But once again, I'm very thankful for the wonderful insights by the Romaric on the platform engineering, how the DevOps transition to platform transition is look like, and what are the self-service capability that the more importantly he adds some of the wonderful insights around measuring the metrics of the platform and platform teams, because you need to measure your work in order to be and understand if your work is efficiently for a lot of the bigger problems. So I will give you once again some links where you have to go to and find those. This is a link for the Qovery website, qovery.com, Kovery. And this is the link to their GitHub repository, because see various different projects. They have a
Yeah.
Twitter handle that eventually shows some of the details around what's happening on daily basis. And they have a Discord, so you can join in, ask question. So the wonderful community is actually building up. And this is the white paper from the platform that the CNCF announced it on the KubeCon Amsterdam. And I also have one of the contributor to that. Go check that out. And if you want to a way to contribute it, do let me know. And here's the podcast I did on the or ergonomics on history of platform engineering, where we discuss about containerization wave versus virtualization wave. Here's a link for the platform engineering, the backstage one that I did on the past with Martina Iglesias. Here's a go-to wonderful, I think, is a talk available on the internet. Platform engineering as a community service on the go-to channel in the YouTube, the go-to conference. Is DevOps is dead and the platform engineering long live? I have a wonderful friend from the Kubernetes community, Victor Farsik, at the YouTube channel on DevOps Toolkit. They have a wonderful deep dive into it. And with that, you can subscribe to the channel and you can follow us on the Twitter handle. With that, I will go to and let me briefly explain before I let you go. You can look at your platform can not only work in the technical realm, they need to improve how software is delivered. This need to be backed up by factual data that the organization can use to justify new initiatives and investments. Platform teams must thoroughly understand all of their internal user personas and their needs and develop the right kind of backend and user interfaces for the platform that deliver maximum value to all their internal users. So with that, thank you very much for tuning into this channel and listening to the podcast. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Do let me know in the comments in the YouTube, and I will invite again in future for Marek again, definitely to give us a hands-on demos of the Qovery as well. With that, thank you very much, everyone who tuned into this podcast. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye bye.